In fact, I will go so far as to say that Jordan Peterson is the Deepak Chopra of Christianity, and within
Jordan Peterson is right, most of the time. Some of the time, though, there are valid criticisms of his ideas. What we're gonna do right now is, as a longtime Jordan Peterson fan, I'm gonna react and review a critique of Jordan Peterson. We're gonna see what's valid, we're gonna see what's not valid, and you're gonna learn a lot about Jordan Peterson from this. Before we do this, please go down right now and hit like and subscribe, and I'm gonna start this right away. Thank you.
So let me begin by saying that I entirely appreciate why so many venerate and idolise Jordan Peterson, as he's obviously an intelligent and insightful man whose defence of free speech and biological facts has been truly admirable.
Insightful. That's nice.
In fact, it's precisely for these reasons that he has my respect. However, unlike many of his critics, who caveat their criticisms by first making clear that they're very fond of the man, I won't, because I'm not. To be blunt, while I recognise Peterson's intellect and charisma, I'm convinced that he's one of the most overrated public intellectuals of our time, and that this is especially the case when it comes to his views on religion. In fact, I will go so far as to say that Jordan Peterson is the Deepak Chopra of Christianity, and within
I kind of like Deepak Chopra. I don't know, is that supposed to be an insult? It sounds like, you know, Deepak Chopra, he's a spiritual teacher, I believe. I believe I did a meditation program that was his at one point, and I got great value out of it. So I don't know what's wrong with that, but anyway, let's keep going.
In the following few videos, I intend to explain precisely why. Of course, I prefer to address all of his religious views in just one video, but given my current situation, I unfortunately can't justify doing this. But, as just indicated, what I can justify is creating a series of videos which each address a pillar of his beliefs, and then later compile them all together. And so, with that said, where better to begin than with Epistemology 101? This is Jordan Peterson's Truth Debunked.
Ooh. Epistemology is the study of truth, by the way. It's a branch of philosophy. Rationality rules.
On the 9th of November 2015, in an interview with Transliminal, Peterson had the following to say on the topic of truth.
So now then you ask yourself, well, how do you determine whether or not a theory is true? Then you ask yourself, well, what do you mean by true? Well, then you're in trouble. Okay, because I think you can take a Newtonian perspective on that, or a Darwinian perspective, but you can't do both at the same time.
Okay, so I'm going to interject quite a lot within this video, but it's only to simplify and adequately address what's being said. So far, Peterson has claimed that there's two perspectives on truth. The first is what he calls Newtonian, which he later defines as strictly materialistic.
Truth as defined by the axioms of the materialist philosophy.
And the second is what he calls Darwinian, which he later defines as that which permits survival.
Sufficient truth is the truth that allows you to survive and reproduce. And from a Darwinian perspective, there isn't any truth past that.
But there's immediately several problems here, and not the least of which is that he's committing a black and white fallacy. He's falsely asserting that there's only two perspectives of truth, when in fact there's many more, including...
I don't think he states that there's not other possible truths. I think he's just stating that these are two possible definitions of truth that are functional in their own ways.
Well, there are truths other than the literal that perhaps are more truthful than even literal truths. You know, there are many kinds of truth, and I don't mean that in a postmodern way, actually.
But let's keep going.
The most subscribed to, which is realism. Realists, like me, and probably you, hold that reality exists with or without our viewing it. That is, that a falling tree makes a sound with or without our being there to hear it. But we don't assert that reality is strictly materialistic. And a second problem that's worth emphasising at this point is that while Peterson's definition of truth can be seen as Darwinian, it does not represent Darwin's view. And so when Peterson says or implies that it does,
and that's basically Darwin's claim,
know that he's putting words never spoken into Darwin's mouth.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, he used a label and he exaggerated that it's Darwin's idea, but it's the idea of evolution applied to ideas. So let's keep going.
Anyhow, here's Peterson fleshing out his perspective of truth, which, courtesy of Bret Weinstein, is now known as metaphorical truth.
So Nietzsche said truth serves life. Okay, in some sense that's a Darwinian idea, okay? If it's true enough so that if you act it out or hold it, that increases your chances of survival and reproduction over long spans of time. That's true.
And here's him putting it more clearly to Sam Harris while on Harris's podcast.
The fundamental axiom that I'm playing with is something that was basically expressed by Nietzsche, and it's a definition of truth. And so I would say, if it doesn't serve life, it's not true.
Now, while this definition is needlessly confusing, it's not inherently flawed. If Peterson and his ilk want to call that which serves life, or that which increases human flourishing, true, then that's fine. Again, it's confusing because it means, for example, that if the fact that atoms store potential energy should one day prove fatal to us, then while this fact will remain true in the colloquial/realist sense of the word, it will all of a sudden become false in the Peterson sense of the word. But what's not fine is to insist, as Peterson does, that should a fact become false according to the Peterson definition of truth, then it will also become false according to the realist definition of truth.
It sounds like what you're saying is that truth is as much about action as it is about some sort of material, measurable, objective reality.
No, I'm saying it's more about action.
More about...
Oh yes, yes. The fundamentals of truth are those that guide action. And then the objective science is nested inside that. It has.
Right. Interesting. So, see, the difficulty here is he's saying the fundamentals of truth. He's not speaking in terms of the idea that there are multiple truths. And for context, the idea that there's multiple truths can be thought of like looking at things through a different lens. So if you look at history, you could look at it through the lens of warfare. And you're looking at it in terms of like warring parties and these groups. And then you could look at it on the level of, say culture or the individual's experience or different things. And now what's going on here is he's saying that when you're concerned with action, when you're asking questions around how you should live in the world, questions that a psychologist would like to ask. What does the state of like atoms and matter or potential energy have to do with, you dealing with something like depression? How does that help you live a good life where that you might be fulfilled at the end? Like, the science of getting a rocket to Mars doesn't help you with those kinds of questions. They're in different domains. So a truth, like say a Chinese proverb from Confucius or from ancient philosophers in Greece, like those kind of truths, they don't necessarily have to be about the material world. They can be a Darwinian truth, or you could say a metaphorical truth. You could express them in the form of a story that didn't actually happen, but it contains the wisdom that helps you guide your action. That's a different kind of truth. If you're asking questions about operating in the world, then objective science could help you. Say like, I want to be happy and healthy. Okay, how can you be healthy? Well, let's look into the science of nutrition. Now, the objective science of nutrition is helping guide your action towards living a better, healthier life. And it's the first part about living the happier, healthier life is the part that is a Darwinian truth, not a materialistic truth. So let's keep going.
Has to be. Right. There's no way around that. There's only one way you can define truth in relationship to finite beings. It's true enough. True enough for what? True enough so that you survive and reproduce. That's it. You don't get to go any farther. What's more true than that? Sorry.
So like imagine like scientifically basing every decision that you'd ever made in your entire life. Like what clothing fabric is best for the contact of your skin for long-term health, and how hot should your shower be to not damage the oils on your skin. And cold showers are also good for you, but hot showers are good because it cleans you better. And how could that affect the germ distribution on your body, and how does that affect the state of all the necessary germs on your body? Like it would be infinite. Like we're finite beings. We can't process all the material information about the world. We don't know the state of every atom in the apple we're about to eat, or if there's like one toxic micromercury atom that happened to be in there coincidentally. Like you don't get to look at life infinitely. We need to operate in the world, and to do that we have to take a summarized, an incomplete, a metaphorical view of the world. Right? We understand the apple as being this thing with which that we eat, but the apple itself, we don't understand it in terms of atoms in our head.
Can't ask that question. That's it. You've hit the limit, and that's basically Darwin's claim.
And to provide just one more example, here's him putting it another way, but this time as a response to an excellent criticism from Weinstein.
So my point was essentially that there is something called metaphorical truth and that it's a real thing. So I'm in agreement with you on that. Where we might be in disagreement is that there is simultaneously a thing that I would call literal truth or scientific truth. And by the way, I'm not saying that what scientists say is in this category inherently. Scientists can be wrong. But the point is truth that is scientifically verifiable, that makes predictions, has a special priority in this hierarchy because it is the one objective version. It is not contingent on being nested in a series of beliefs. So,
what if it's a scientific truth that's metaphorically wrong?
Oh, and there are...
Like, I can give you an example. Okay, so I read the memoirs of a KGB scientist, KGB agent, who worked with the Russians in this biochemical lab, and their job was to meld Ebola with smallpox. Because smallpox Ebola is not that contagious, and so that's kind of annoying if you're trying to kill people, whereas smallpox, but it's really fatal, whereas smallpox is really contagious. So if you could get the two together and then develop an aerosol spray, you could kill a lot of people. And in fact, they did kill about 500 Russians by mistake when some of what they were doing escaped. But it isn't obvious to me that that's an invalid scientific pursuit. But I do think that it's an invalid ethical pursuit. And so that seems to me to indicate that the ethical pursuit supersedes the scientific pursuit with regards to truth claim.
Now, just before I crack down on Peterson's assertion, and in the anticipation of being accused of not understanding his position, I want to make something extremely clear. I entirely understand and accept that our perception of facts and reality, that is, our perception of realist truth, is subject to natural selection, or metaphorical truth. And so if Peterson's assertion was merely that this fact prevents us from having access to raw realist truth, then I'd have no objection. But he's not merely asserting this, he's asserting that scientific, objective, realist, literal truth is outright the product of metaphorical Peterson truth.
The fundamentals of truth are those that guide action. And then the objective science is nested inside that.
The ethical pursuit supersedes the scientific pursuit with regards to truth claim.
Right. So again, like with regards to truth claim, what does it mean for something to be true? It means that it's the lens through which you see things. So let's say you ask a question, should a scientist meld Ebola to smallpox? Scientifically, you could say, well, we have technology, we could blend them together, we can choose not to blend them together, but the choice to do it isn't a materialistic question. It's not in that domain. It's in a different domain. It's in the domain of ethics. It's in the domain of action. It's in the domain of how we should be in the world. Do we want to live in a world where we have scientists blending horrible viruses and diseases together? No, we don't. So when you ask that question, the right domain is the metaphorical one, the Darwinian one, the one that concerns action. It isn't the materialistic one, but not in terms of materialistic truth.
So, what exactly is wrong with Peterson's assertion? Why doesn't metaphorical truth supersede literal truth? Well, first and foremost,
it doesn't supersede with respect to the truth claim, it supersedes with respect to considerations of behavior and policy.
There you go, exactly. So he's saying it doesn't supersede with respect to truth claim if your definition of truth is that of the materialistic one. It doesn't, if that's how you define truth. But he's just defined a concept of truth that is very useful and relevant when you're asking questions around policy and action.
Secondly, though more importantly, it violates the law of non-contradiction. To borrow an example from Weinstein, the concepts of heaven and reincarnation can both be considered metaphorically true, because they both increase our chances of survival due to them encouraging us to cooperate and behave. But the problem is that they can't both be true, they're mutually exclusive. One claims that when we die, we'll rise up to Cloudsville to be reunited with our loved ones, while the other claims that we'll manifest a new body and start anew.
So they're both, if you understand those statements literally, they both can't be true, because one's in Cloudsville and one's they're staying on Earth, right? But if you understand them metaphorically, they're both just metaphors for the idea that there is existence after life and what you do now matters for the afterlife. Then they are equivalent. They're equivalent symbolically. They aren't equivalent literally. But you see what he's doing. It's like, you know, if you just take the truth to be literal truth, if you're looking at through the literal truth, then it doesn't make sense. So, yeah.
Or as Weinstein puts it,
what I'm arguing is that what makes the scientific truth hierarchically superior is that it explains all the subordinate truths in a way that is logically consistent. Whereas if you were to prioritize heaven as a truth, then you would have to say, well, reincarnation is therefore false, or you would have to have them all simultaneously be true in some unreconcilable way. So the only one that has the special characteristic of accounting for all the others is the scientific truth.
And thirdly, though perhaps even more importantly, Peterson is conflating our perception of reality with reality itself, a map for the place, as it were.
If you just watch the intro video to the biblical series, he specifically says that he's going to approach his understanding of literature and the Bible and certain things with a phenomenological perspective.
And then finally, it's phenomenological. Modern people, you know, we think of reality as objective. And that's very powerful. But that isn't how we experience reality.
What is phenomenology? But it's basically the idea that it's taking a lens of the world where your perception is reality. And to some extent, your perception is your psychological reality, that's for sure. So when you're dealing in the realm of psychology, phenomenology is super valid. You can decide to pick that lens if you want to look at things through a psychological lens. The thing is here, he's basically just sticking to the one truth, the one frame, the one lens, which is looking at reality as materialistic truth and kind of dismissing all the other ones. It's like he's not conflating them. Like there's a definition of reality, which is that it is your perceptions, and that lens is useful in certain circumstances. So, yeah.
Peterson is asserting that because our ability to perceive facts and reality is nested in Peterson truth, therefore facts and reality is nested in Peterson truth. Which is akin to me asserting that because you're currently perceiving me in 2 dimensions, I am 2 dimensions. Or to put it another way, Peterson is asserting that because we can only perceive objective facts subjectively, there are no objective facts. But that's not how it works, and it's not what all of the evidence indicates. To quote Harris,
you clearly have to have a conception of facts and truth that is possible to know, that exceeds what anyone currently knows and exceeds any concern about whether it is useful or compatible with your own survival even to know these truths.
Right. So he's making the case there for having a materialistic truth. I love modern medicine. I love some of the technology that we have and the means that we have to be on YouTube right now. I'm very grateful for that. And that only comes with understanding materialistic truth and seeing that as being important, right?
Anyhow, after explaining this to Peterson over 7 times, Harris, with fair frustration, delivered the following elegant bombshell.
Now, the claim about whether or not she's cheating on you is an intelligible claim. That's a claim that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you wind up killing yourself based on your reaction to this unhappy truth. If you then wound up killing yourself, we could say at the end of the day, well, it would be better if he hadn't known that. It would certainly be better if she hadn't done that. It would have been better if he had married a different woman. Surely we would want to say that.
It might be better if he would have paid attention to his damn marriage and to attribute the cause of his demise to the existence of the photographs. This is why I brought up Josh Green, is that investigations into this kind of morality always frame it in such a way that...
Jordan, you have to grant one thing here. There's one piece that doesn't get moved here. You cannot move the piece that because you killed yourself, it's not true that she was having an affair. That move is not open to you, and yet you're acting like it is.
Okay, so we need to look at this look at the situation and pick the right kind of truth that matches the situation, right? The correct lens. So if we're asking the question, is it materially true that she went off with some other dude and did something? That's a materialistic question. And the questions around perception, questions around how you should live, questions around, what's better for you to know and understand, like that isn't relevant if you're asking a question about the material world. So let's put this in a different situation. Let's say that you were an ancient philosopher and you were writing a story that you knew would be handed down to generation and generation and would inform how they live their life. Now, if you want to write this such that it's helping them, guide them to live the best life they can, you get to choose what you're going to write. You know, let's say in the story, the wife cheats on the husband. I can choose either for him to kill himself in this story or for him to get back on his horse, get his life together. It would be false in terms of Darwinian truth for him to kill himself, but it would be more true and more useful and better for guiding action if he got back on his horse and did inner work and worked on himself in that story. So if you're looking at old stories like the Bible, it's not useful to look at it materialistically. It's useful to look at it metaphorically.
You're acting like it is.
Now, in my opinion, this application of the reductio ad absurdum technique annihilates Peterson's assertion. It's simple. If one was to commit suicide because their partner was cheating on them, the act of suicide wouldn't make their partner's cheating on them untrue in the realist sense. Sure, it would make it untrue in the Peterson sense, but it wouldn't in the realist. Period.
Yeah.
If a tree falls and nobody hears it, it still makes a sound. It still emits vibrations. Now, with Peterson's definition of truth thoroughly addressed, I want to ask a potent question. Why does Peterson want to nest not only our perception of realist truth, but realist truth itself within Peterson truth? Is it perhaps possible that he has a motive? Well, I'm convinced that he does. You see, this sleight of hand comes in extremely useful to apologists such as Peterson, because when he's asked a question to which he has a justifiable answer, such as, is it true that there are only two sexes, he can, and does, answer according to the realist definition of truth. But when he's asked a question to which he doesn't have a justifiable answer, such as, is it true that a literal historical man called Jesus resurrected, he answers according to the Peterson definition of truth, which, considering his animosity for postmodernism, is ironically postmodern. To borrow a phrase from Harris, this is how you play tennis without the net, and it's so disingenuous that I can't help but conclude that Peterson is doing it on purpose. That he...
Okay, here's another analogy. It's like, in one case, you're playing basketball with the basketball, and in the other case, you're playing tennis with the tennis ball. But what this guy's trying to do is he's trying to go to the metaphorical truth court where they're playing basketball, and he's bringing a tennis racket. That's what I feel is going on here.
Being deliberately obtuse in order to preserve beliefs that he knows damn well are false. Now, if you're not already convinced of this, then perhaps the following clip will change your mind.
Okay, quick question, are you a Christian?
I suppose the most straightforward answer to that is yes, although I think it's let's leave it at yes.
Well, I'm a bit dissatisfied with that because there are so many kinds of Christians, and I would never imagine that you were a very literal-minded Christian.
Well,
literal.
There are truths other than the literal that perhaps are more truthful than even literal truths. You know, there are many kinds of truth, and I don't mean that in a postmodern way, actually.
And he just said there are many kinds of truth. Remember the fallacy at the start of the video, black and white? He said the guy claimed that Jordan Peterson is making this black and white claim there are only two kinds of truths. He just acknowledged that there's a bunch. And he just said that, you know, it's ironic that Jordan Peterson will acknowledge that there are different kinds of truths when he dislikes postmodernism. But right there he said he doesn't mean it in a postmodernist sense. And that's true. There's a way to look at the fact that there are many ways of seeing the world without completely annihilating all possible ways of seeing the world. So, yeah.
But the truths that govern behavior and the truths that emerge from facts are not the same truths.
Yes, different domains.
Do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead? Literally.
Literally. Now it's in the literal domain. So this is interesting.
I cannot answer that question. And the reason is because... Okay, let me think about it for a minute. See if I can come up with a reasonable answer to that. Well, the first answer would be, it depends on what you mean by Jesus.
A historical human being that existed
in a body. And
in a body.
In a body. And,
yes.
And it was a physical body, and that it was on Earth.
Yes, that it was on Earth, and that was literally came back to life after death.
I would say that at the moment I'm agnostic about that issue, which is a lot different than saying I don't believe that it happened.
You see,
So, okay, that's a very legitimate thing to bring up. It's this thing. It's that he leaves the door open to the possibility of the mystical, non-material things that could have happened. So Jordan Peterson doesn't want to denounce that possibility. He doesn't want to leave that out. For whatever reason, who knows? He said he's agnostic about it. Fair enough. I don't believe that personally. I don't think you need to believe that that's possible to appreciate it metaphorically. I certainly think he would say it metaphorically is true. It's useful metaphorically. It's part of a story that guides our action. It's not meant to be understood literally necessarily, but you can ask a question, did the stories in the Bible literally happen? And the answer is, it actually doesn't matter for using it as a guide for action in your life. But if you do want to ask that question, I wasn't there. I don't know. I didn't have measurement devices. I didn't see it with my eyes, so I can't really answer it. I would say, no, it doesn't need to happen, right? And he's leaving the possibility open that it did. So that's how I understand this. If you understand it differently, let me know in the comments below.
Someone corners Peterson by forcing him to answer religious questions according to the realist definition of truth. That is, the definition that he uses in every other domain of discourse. His religious views are exposed for what they are: unjustified nonsense. It seems to me that the reason that Peterson insists on his definition of truth is because it renders everything we confidently know, all facts, all knowledge, as ultimately unknown, because at any moment, however unlikely, they may lead to our demise and thus become untrue in the Peterson sense, and therefore, as he insists, also untrue in the realist sense. To put it bluntly, redefining truth in order to avoid an inconvenient truth is as dishonest as it gets.
He's not redefining it though, right? We understood from the start that there are different kinds of truths and it's a different domain that's useful in different circumstances. So he's not redefining it. It's a different kind of truth. But you could see how someone who only acknowledges or who's only willing to put the literal truth, the materialistic truth, as truth, you talk about truth and that's what you mean, they're not going to acknowledge this other useful idea of truth, and they're going to say, well, you're just redefining it so that you can do a sleight of hand, so that you can sneak Christianity into the modern world. But the whole idea is that there's a different kind of truth and one is more useful in certain circumstances. So
intelligent and skeptical people don't accept such utter nonsense from New Age spirituality,
Deepak,
and so neither should they accept it from New Age Christianity. Peterson is no doubt a very smart, knowledgeable and insightful person, but when it comes to religion, he's no better than any other apologist. He manipulates language, misrepresents philosophy and science, and is fallacious in his reasoning.
No.
This video alone doesn't prove this outright, of course, but it does make a good start, and I'll be sure to follow it up. As always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful...
Alright, so what we just saw, I believe, is like a guy, you know, I don't want to, I hate the idea of like putting people in a box. I'd like to understand him as a whole person with a whole set of views and beliefs about the world. I would guess that this guy kind of has this like anti-religious view and is somewhat of, you could say, an activist about it, and thinks that discouraging religious belief is a positive thing, which I actually used to be before Jordan Peterson, fun fact, so I know where he's coming from. And there's this interesting quote that I heard one time. I don't know where it's from, but it's basically that if you have an agenda, you can't imagine anyone else operating without an agenda. So when he said he's talking about Jordan Peterson's motive, that he had to hunt and find his secret motive, right? So he would try to look for where people might allow for those beliefs to happen and then like attack it in maybe a disingenuous way. Now, I don't want to say that he's being disingenuous, right? He's a person, right? And he has his beliefs and he has his stories and he has his reason for believing what he believes. So does Jordan Peterson. And I think that if you were to dive into the biblical series and see the way he talks about it and how that metaphorical truth is just so ripe with wisdom, it's so valuable, the insight that you can get. He even called them insightful, right? Like, it's so insightful to look at these old stories metaphorically. You don't have to look at them literally. Although many religious people do say that they believe the literal truth of the Bible, which is weird, and Jordan Peterson actually distances himself from. He says, no, like science isn't creationism. He said that at some point in, I believe, another video. Like they aren't the same thing. And you could look at Jonathan Pajot. He's an Orthodox Christian who discusses symbolism on his YouTube channel. And he also says, if you try to look at the event behind the story, you're not going to find anything. He dismisses the kind of literal perspective. He has a soul, he calls it the symbolic view of the world. You could watch his video, How There Is No Literal Truth. That was mind-blowing when I watched it. Now I think he kind of does the opposite of this guy. He dismisses a literal truth and only looks at the symbolic truth. I think there's room for both, right? Certain things, questions about medicine and space travel are questions around the materialistic world, questions around the good life, how you should live your life, what being a good person is, question around ethics, questions around action. Those are questions around the metaphorical truth. So, thank you very much for watching. This is me reacting to a criticism of Jordan B. Peterson. As a longtime fan of Jordan Peterson, I hope you found this really insightful. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Please subscribe and like this video, and I'll come back at you again with another one. Cheers.